We're having a bonus webinar today, a bonus webinar called Soy Anno 2026 after the EUDR decisions. We promised an extra webinar because of the changes being made. Thank you. So on the agenda today, a welcome by us, Helene van der Homberg and Doutzen Wagenaar. A new geopolitical context we're in, some words about the Mercosur trade deal, quite extensive updates on the EUDR, as well as the EU omnibus process. We're presenting briefly a new Profundo benchmark on EUDR alignment of soy standards, and we will say something about the new developments of the Amazon soy moratorium, some soy-related projects for EUDR implementation in Mercosur will be mentioned, and then we'll close this last webinar of the 7-episode series. So, welcome again. We want to provide an update on the EU legislative developments since October 25, when we last saw each other during the recap session. So we organized this together, CSI, together with IUCN, also in terms of time investments, and we will inform you how you can stay connected to CSI and IUCN NL. As you saw, there were webinars in April, in 2 of them, in May, 2 of them, in June. There was a recap after summer in 2025 and this bonus webinar. As many of you know, the Collaborative Soy Initiative has a vision of 100% conversion-free sustainable soy production and uptake on a global scale. Our mission is to inform, create synergy, and add value where needed on this topic. You can find all info on this website, and the types of activities we've been doing are events such as these, webinars, I think 40 of them between 2019 and 2025. We have an info hub with all CSI own materials, EUDR materials, and more. We created a CSI guidance for EUDR or EU compliant soy with impact, combining tools for impact. It knows a version 2.2 right now, and there will probably be a version 2.3 for these last small changes that are made in the past few months. So, and this masterclass series with 250 subscribers from feed and trade and retail and NGOs and other. And the recordings and the materials, such as the PowerPoints, will be available on the Academy website. So you can see also the links through the CSI site. You can access the materials to GMP Plus Academy website. So this is a picture of the, I think, well-known guide now of EU compliant soy with impact, guiding companies through the guidelines. We try to guide you through the different aspects of EUDR as well as other very essential sustainability features. So know your EUDR compliance basis, but also do not implement it in isolation. Establish robust due diligence processes, press for broader sustainability values, credibly verify all supply if you can, and support landscapes beyond your own resource base, supply base. Thank you. Next one. So probably you've been preparing, probably you've been running, and probably also you've been waiting for the EUDR decisions to take place. Well, a lot of things have happened. We are in a bumpy geopolitical context. Wars and tensions for new wars, trade wars and tariffs. There's a bumpy geopolitical road that cannot be ignored in the soy sector. The EU is focused on sourcing and territorial security and less on the Green Deal right now, also under pressure from within. There's regulatory and sourcing insecurity, and this is a concern for the whole supply chain. Because of the tariff wars, the signing of the Mercosur trade deal was accelerated, you could say. This Mercosur trade deal is a deal between the EU's 27 member states and the Mercosur partners Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay. It creates one of the world's largest free trade areas and covers more than 700 million people and over 20%, I've heard 30% even, of global GDP. It's a result of 25 years of negotiations between EU and Mercosur, and it was pitched lately by both parties as a forceful rejection of tariffs, isolationism, and the growing use of trade as a geopolitical weapon. The deal includes an interim trade agreement and a EU-Mercosur partnership agreement, and it will scrap duties on 91 of EU exports over 15 years and making it the most expansive tariff-cutting pact the bloc has ever reached. The EU will liberalize 82% of Mercosur agricultural imports, including soy, for about a decade. And for some products, tariff rate quotas will apply. And that means that there is a certain amount that can enter the EU for a low or absent tariff. And after that, it is regular. So it applies to beef. It applies to beef, chicken, pork, sugar, ethanol, rice, honey, maize, and sweet corn, and it doesn't apply to soy. We hope we're right here. We work with the best information we have, but it may be that we make mistakes. So the small disclaimer here. Next, please. So the agreement eliminates tariffs on more than 90% of bilateral trade, and it's expected to enter into force by the end of 2026, so along with the EUDR, if not obstructed. So what we don't know is to what extent these lower tariffs and these declining tariffs counter the costs of EUDR implementation in these countries and in these value chains. What is expected now is that a 90% increase will occur in the exports to Mercosur, while Mercosur exports to Europe could rise by 17%. And how this will impact on soy trade, we don't know. But while the European Commission has signed the agreement on February 17th, a couple of days later, the EU Parliament already made clear it does not agree, the majority does not agree as yet, and seeks the top court. And we're not sure if the EU does continue with the trade deal or it has to overcome some of those hurdles. Meanwhile, I think it is useful to study the Sustainable Development Fact Sheet, already a few years old, because it does give some entrance point for an important topic of us, of course, and that is the sustainable trade. So it does give some entrance points, such as the next slide, please. Strong and legally binding environment and climate commitments. So it will promote trade in products that contribute to the conservation of biodiversity, prohibit trade in illegally obtained products, etc. It will really actively promote the Paris Agreement, CITES, Convention on Wildlife Trade, etc., and also labor and environmental standards in more general, like the next slide. Responsible supply chains, also including ILO agreements, UN Global Compact, UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises, protection of human rights and labor rights. So on top of the EUDR and other laws that will be mentioned soon by Doutzen, it might be that this helps also in pushing for sustainable trade. Let's see and let's make it work. Next, please. Over to you, Doutzen.
Yes, thank you, Helene, and hello to everyone watching this webinar. Yeah, since last time we saw each other, a lot has changed. I think you're all aware that the EUDR was delayed with 1 year, and I also assume that most of you have followed many webinars from our masterclass series, but I will still repeat some EUDR basics just to have everyone on the same page. So the European Union Deforestation Regulation is a regulation implemented in the European Union to make sure that the import, the own production, and the export of 7 different commodities is free from deforestation and produced in line with legal requirements. The 7 different commodities you all know already, but they are listed in Annex 1 in more detail. So it's 7 bigger groups, but all the individual specific products are listed in Annex 1. And I think you also remember that the law makes a distinction between operators and traders. And in this new change that came into being December 2025, something is really changing here. Now, to prove that all these products are free from deforestation and produce in legal requirements, companies have to apply due diligence and collect information, assess the risks, and mitigate the risks. So this due diligence process is 3 different steps that companies have to undertake. And this first step, this collection of information, includes the collection of the polygons, which of course is quite a challenging task. And those polygons have to be updated in the European Information System, just as a due diligence statement. And this package of information then gets its unique due diligence reference number. Well, you're also all aware that the EUDR compliant material has to be kept segregated from non-EUDR compliant material, which, depending on the supply chain and the product, is also very challenging. And last but not least, there is a country benchmark in which countries are assigned a low, standard, or high risk, which is especially relevant for the competent authorities. The higher the risk, the more intense the controls. So these are more or less the main ingredients of the EUDR. And of course, the previous webinars have a lot more detailed information. All right, at the moment, we do have 3 different versions, you could say, of the EUDR. Well, obviously, the first one is the official EUDR text, but the EUDR was amended at the end of 2024, postponing the law for 1 year, which was quite of a small revision, you could say. But very recently, on the 19th of December, a new regulation came into being, not only postponing once more for 1 year, but also really fundamentally changing how the EUDR works. And that is what I will now also introduce in more detail. All right, so I already mentioned that the EUDR was delayed by 1 additional year. So instead of being in the middle of EUDR at this moment, it's postponed with 1 more year. And the new deadline is 30 December 2026 for most companies, and the 30th of June for very small companies. And this difference has always been in the EUDR, but it's just now twice postponed for 1 year. But there is something changing in a more fundamental way in this new revision. Because where before this due diligence obligation was actually obligatory for almost everyone, whether you were a trader or an operator, SME, non-SME, this due diligence obligation is now really limited to operators alone. And the definition for operators is also different than it was before. So it means that the operator, that is the company that first places a product on the European Union market, and of course it has to be a product from Annex 1, and all the other operators are now called downstream operators, and also the traders, they have a lot less work to do. They basically have to register information of their own suppliers and their own customers, which is obviously quite logical to do that. And they have to collect that information for 5 years. And they also need to register the due diligence reference numbers, but only when they buy from these operators. So from the operators that first places the product on the market. So when a so-called downstream operator buys from another downstream operator, then these reference numbers don't have to travel along anymore. So this due diligence chain is really a lot shorter than it was before. However, downstream operators and traders, they still will have a limited liability. But I will tell a bit more about that later. All right, so the last time we saw each other, we already mentioned that the European Commission proposal introduced new definitions, and they are also adopted in the new regulation. So what is new is this definition of a downstream operator, which is any company that places a product on the market which was already covered by a due diligence statement of a different operator, of a normal operator, you could say. So that means that there were many different operators before. Now it's really only the one placing the product on the market, which is the real operator, and the downstream operators have a lot less requirements, a lot less obligations, you could say. Now, in addition to that, there is a new definition of a micro and small primary operator. I think this is introduced to really accommodate farmers in the European Union, but who should say that? So it's really about small, very small companies who are placing on the market products from Annex 1, but they're established in a country classified as low risk. So in line with this country benchmark. And for this specific group, there is an easier procedure. They have to do a one-time only simplified declaration in the European Information System or a system created by the member states. So for this specific group from low-risk countries, it is a lot easier than it was before. And then last but not least, the original definition of the operator, you could say, but then with the addition excluding downstream operator. So when we now talk about operators, it's really the company that first places a product on the market that has no due diligence yet. Right. Okay, so since we have been talking about this smaller, micro, medium-sized undertaking, we thought it would be easy or good to add this more for the archive than anything else. So you can look like, hey, in which category is my company and what does it mean for me? And these values are from the accounting directive, and they also have been updated to deal with things like inflation. All right. So that being said, what are now then the new roles and responsibilities for all these new types of roles, you could say? So this operator is basically what was the operator before. So they have to do everything. They have to submit a due diligence statement, upload the polygons, and really verify whether there was no deforestation and legal compliance. And they have to do that very soon, because for the 30th of December 2026, that is when it really starts. The downstream operator and the traders, they have a lot less to do. I already mentioned that. They have to collect basic details of their suppliers and their customers. And when they buy directly from an operator, they also have to collect these due diligence reference numbers. So the operator, the first operator, shares this information with the downstream operator and the trader, if any, but then it really stops. Now, for SME operators, the role is very similar to the normal operator, but they have more time. So the 30th of June 2027, and these micro and small primary operators in low-risk countries, they also have more time, and they have this easier procedure to submit a one-time simplified declaration. All right, so I already mentioned that although the roles of both these new downstream operators and traders are slightly relaxed, they are still liable in some sense, because the new regulation really says if companies downstream become aware that there is something wrong with the product, that deforestation did actually take place, or there was no legal compliance, then they have to really inform the competent authorities as soon as possible. And also if they have some concerns like, we don't really know for sure whether this company really has done its due diligence, then they also still have to do that themselves. So it's not really that you can lean back and have to do nothing anymore, but the roles are really a bit relaxed the more downstream you go. All right, so that is, I think, the main change in the new regulation. But there were other changes. So certain printed products, so specific HS codes, have been removed from Annex 1, especially like books, newspapers, printed pictures. That category is now a bit smaller. But I think what's more interesting is that the new regulation introduces the obligation for the European Commission to conduct a so-called simplification review of the EUDR. and then present a report with the findings by the 30th of April, which is, of course, very interesting because EUDR is already quite simplified compared to the original text. But of course, it fits into this whole omnibus process that we will also introduce a bit later. So this report, the simplification review, should evaluate the impact and the administrative burden of the EUDR, especially on smaller companies. And also when there are things that are not too bureaucratic or too difficult, the European Commission should prepare a legislative proposal for simplification. So I do think that at this moment we are all waiting for this simplification review, like what will happen. It has already been quite insecure, like how the EUDR will continue, but now with the simplification coming up, I expect companies to wait until they know more details. All right, so we leave the topic of the EUDR and we continue a bit with the simplification that's now going on in the European Union. Helene already introduced the European Green Deal, which was really created in 2019 as a political strategy to make the European Union climate neutral and circular in 2050. So it was a very ambitious plan with all kinds of different policy packages assigned to it, like in the left picture. And many of these packages have really been implemented, and this Green Deal train really got running. But as Helene also introduced in the beginning, the world really changed quite fundamentally. And that's also why in 2023, Mario Draghi, who is a former director of the European Central Bank and a very renowned economist in the European Union, he wrote, I could say, famous report by now about the competitiveness of the European Union and our future economy, like where do we earn our money in the future and how are we becoming a resilient, healthy, thriving economy. Now, actually, he in his report says, well, this Green Deal was actually quite a good idea to become less dependent on certain countries, to really have this economy of the future. However, we have gone a bit too far in terms of regulations. It's the regulatory complexity in the European Union is so high that it really limits competitiveness and entrepreneurship. So that should change. Well, with that task, the new European Commission that is led by the same lady that was responsible for the Green Deal, they really took this message quite seriously. And now this simplification tour is, you could say, going on. And it's referred to as the omnibus process. So an omnibus is a legal instrument that is able to change many different laws at the same time by only one piece of legislation, or introducing new laws at once. So it's quite efficient, a quite efficient instrument, you could say. So this omnibus instrument is really now used by the European Commission, like the European Union, to simplify all kinds of pieces of existing legislation, which are clustered in different omnibus packages. And there are currently 10 of those omnibus packages, which I will show in a minute. Here they are already. I think it's good to mention that EUDR is not officially part of one of these packages. It has been mentioned a lot in the environmental omnibus though. And I think most of you also have heard of the laws within the first omnibus package. So the CSRD is in there, the CSDDD is there, the EU taxonomy is there, the carbon border adjustment mechanism is also there. So the sustainability people in the room really are very familiar with this first package. But in the meantime, we do have 10. The date that you see on top is the date that the proposals were launched by the European Commission. So the last ones are really quite new still, and only the first 3 really are in a finalization stage. And also in 2026, more new omnibus packages are expected. So it's important to watch the space because things can really fundamentally change, as I will also show now. And I picked the CSDDD and the CSRD because in our masterclass series, we also spoke about those. And they are now a bit different, so it's important to have the latest information there as well. So the CSDDD is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and this law has been entering into force since the 25th of July 2024, but of course the effects are still to be expected. However, this new one omnibus law really changes some fundamental parts of the CSDDD and the CSRD and a bit the other ones as well. So this regulation, although it's finalized, it still needs to be published in the official journal of the European Union. And what it basically does for the CSDDD is to delay the moment that companies will have to comply with the CSDDD. And also the scope is a lot smaller than it was before. So only the biggest companies, like more than 5,000 people, employees, and an annual turnover of more than 1.5 billion are now in scope. However, as we know with due diligence, this law also has a trickle-down effect on smaller companies because those bigger ones have smaller companies in their supply chains and they will need information. So they will ask and they will, in that sense, stimulate other companies to also do their due diligence. Good. The CSRD is, you could say, the brother of the CSDDD. It's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And there already the first group of companies that had to report already reported under the CSRD, but the second wave is now a smaller group. So here also the scope has changed to big companies with more than 1,000 people and 450 million turnover. And they also have more time. So it's a smaller group and they only have to report for the first time in 2028 over the 2027 financial year. Now, maybe you recall that this CSRD was accompanied by the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the ESRSs, created by EFRA, a special entity for this. And this is really a cluster of different guidance documents on all kinds of topics like the environment, works in the value chain, climate, water, you name it, and all kinds of requirements on how to report and what to report. Now, with this new revision, these ESRSs are a lot simpler, so fewer data points and also fewer sector-specific standards. So it becomes a bit easier to report under the CSRD. Well, since the scope of the CSRD is now smaller, companies don't always have to report under the CSRD, but still companies can choose to voluntarily report using the structure of the ESRSs and specifically the specific VSME, like the voluntary standard for reporting on sustainability performance. And I think it's also good to mention that the European Commission is trying to really align the CSRD with the CSDDD to further reduce overlap and administrative burden. That was it in terms of the laws. Back to you, Helene.
Thank you for your excellent explanation, Doutzen. I always learn from you as well when I hear you talk, so thanks for this collaboration today. So I'll talk about the Profundo benchmark, published in December 2025. It is an update of this benchmark published before in 2019 and 2023, and we already promised, I say we because we, as IUCN, we were commissioning this study together with others to do an update because of the EUDR. So it studies how robust sustainability standards can support compliance with the EUDR, but also no conversion and also responsible agricultural practices. So different ambitions, including regenerative agriculture, different ambitions of companies. And what we see is several standards are aligned. We could say fully aligned as far as the researchers have been able to see to the delivery of physical EUDR compliant and responsible soy. What we know of the EUDR is that it does not allow standards to be the proof. So the due diligence statements of the operators are the main, let's say, documents here. and they remain responsible for the due diligence, but standards can play an important role in their toolboxes and actually control in the field on EUDR and more. It's interesting to see that in EUDR times that will come, voluntary standards can play a role in various chain of custody models. It goes too far today to go into that, but we paid some attention to it in the appendix as well. That as far as the information of the polygons, the certification information is coupled to the polygons that are in the due diligence statements. It doesn't matter how you exactly call it, but the information then is arriving at the market in a combined way. Of course, this is more complex if you see the declaration in excess, so you don't know exactly if this certified bean is landing on your shelves. But anyway, we think that different chain of custody models, mixed models, are very well possible as long as the whole supply chain is controlled on EUDR basics. So please check it out and how to combine it for DCF. So this picture is showing that some standards, you see the green color, are fully aligned with the EUDR. I have to watch the other screen. ISSC EU and Plus, Proterra, RGRS, Donau Soja, Europe Soja, and also Proterra MRV, and that others such as Amagi are doing a quite good job, and others are let's say also on their way. But for example, in the case of traders standards, traders and operators, I have to say, they need to comply anyway with the EUDR. So if they use their standard or not, they have to do that. But their standard can also add other values to their value chain. Conversion-free, good agricultural practices, social issues, and good governance, and last not least, assurance. In this benchmark, more than before, we did not concentrate so much on this comparison, but rather, and that's the next slide, rather we concentrate on individual descriptions of the assessed standards. All these standards are part of the FAFAC benchmarked ones. So the FAFAC has this soy sustainability criteria, and the standards that we benchmarked, or the researchers benchmarked, they are all part of that lot. But it is interesting because it is not so much who is doing better or worse, but it's really about can they deliver what they have to, right? So that is also sometimes worth an individual conversation with the standard owners or with your suppliers. What risks are well covered and what not? So we invite you to read those individual chapters as well. Next one, please. On the Amazon soy moratorium, briefly, it has long been considered the best and most effective instrument to halt tropical deforestation for soy production in the Amazon. It is currently under threat. Mato Grosso state introduced a law that takes away the tax benefits from any company that participates in any voluntary environmental agreement that goes beyond the Brazilian environmental legislation. So that is has been a threat to some companies. And on the 5th of January of this year, the Brazilian Association of Vegetable Oil Industry, ABIOVE, they represent the largest soybean traders in Brazil, announced plans to withdraw from the Amazon soy moratorium. And that has led to quite some protest from downstream companies and NGOs who've been supporting this as a good working tool all along. It's also worth to mention some projects in the soy producing countries that support the implementation of EUDR. We cannot mention all, of course, we mentioned just some. One is the SAFE project. It facilitates the Tropical Forest Alliance and Proforest and Solidaridad to do studies and hold regional technical dialogues on EUDR implementation in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We understand that the project is extended to March 2028. Other projects, such as from Alinvest Verde, facilitate technical assistance for EUDR preparation. We have to mention that progress is made with national and regional traceability and verification systems for EUDR. And we'd like to mention AgroPlus Sustentável in Brazil, the VSEC for soy and beef in Argentina, and the currently developed REDSA and CISE in Paraguay, REDSA being the government system, CISE more an initiative from traders. They also are aligning with VSEC to a large extent. They are in development in Paraguay. Challenges remain in all countries on checks on legality, on interoperability of systems, and also acceptance of the systems by stakeholders, either by the traders or by the government or by the producers, or last not least, so far not yet formally recognized, and they will probably not be formally recognized by the competent authorities in the member states. So that is an insecurity for the ones developing those systems, but it's interesting to follow it in detail. So because it's also, let's say, steps towards a broader good governance of the value chains in the producing countries. Also want to mention two ICI projects supporting EUDR compliant sustainable value chains and conservation in specific landscapes starting this January in 26. The one is from GIZ, Solidaridad and WWF. They work among others in Brazil and Bolivia on soy and beef. And the other is of IUCN, IUCN-NL, so our organization together with Fundación Vida Silvestre in Argentina, Guida in Paraguay, and also C4ICRAF, Peru, and FCDS in Colombia. So we work among others on Argentina and Paraguay on soy and beef, so there will probably be collaboration between these two ICI projects and also with the other initiatives mentioned. So we're reaching the end of our masterclass series. All of the materials are available on the GMP Plus Academy website. And also today's webinar is included there. All in all, we have 7 episodes. Please check this link if you're not already there right now. And if you're not yet, subscription to the Academy is free of charge, and then you can access all those very rich, we must say, accounts collaborating with many, many good speakers and actors before on the what, on the why, on the where, and the how, and the who of EUDR compliant sustainable value chains. And the last slide then, almost the last slides, we have to acknowledge again the ones who made this possible, and that is the CSI board, of course, but also the WWF project tackling the main drivers of deforestation and conversion in Brazil, supported on their turn by GIZ AgriChange, and they on their turn by the German government. And it has received in-kind support from GMP Plus Academy and also of IUCN and others, the publicity support. And of course, thank you all the listeners, the participants, for your interest in this webinar series, for your interest in sustainable soy. So the very last slide that we have to offer today, that we thank you again for joining us, but we also say we need your support and your thoughts to do this kind of work. So we invite you to join us as a partner. Please contact coordinator at the Collaborative Soy Initiative.info or Helene van den Homberg at IUCN.nl. Please visit the website for our materials and let us stay in touch. We wish you a lot of strength, good luck, and inspiration, and steps ahead in your journey towards conversion-free, sustainable, and EUDR compliant soy in the coming years. Thank you.